Welcome back to This is Thailand. Today's story comes from a man named Gunnar Iverson, 57 years old, originally from Denmark, a man who spent nearly 2 decades of his life keeping the lights on for other people, quite literally before he decided to build something of his own. What happened to that something of his own is the reason he's here, and what happened after that in Thailand is the reason you're going to want to hear this one all the way through. This story isn't loud. Gunnar isn't a shouter, but there's a moment in the middle of it where he did something we don't see very often on this channel, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'll just say this one's going to stick with you. Here's his story in his own words. I climbed poles for 18 years. Danish grid, out past Aarhus, up and down the countryside, in a bucket truck in weather you wouldn't put a dog out in. People think it's simple work. It isn't. Up on the line, you check a connection, you check it again, and then you check it a third time. Because if you're wrong up there, it's not a bad day at the office. It's a funeral. That's just the truth of it. 18 years of that teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you that you're careful. Methodical, my ex-wife used to call it, though not always as a compliment. I liked knowing where I stood. I liked knowing a circuit either worked or it didn't, and there was a way to find out which, every time, if you were patient enough to test it properly. So at 51, I did what I thought was the sensible thing. I'd saved enough, the pension had matured, and I had an offer to buy into a small contracting outfit outside the city. Residential and light commercial work, rewiring old farmhouses, running new lines out to the newer estates going up. I put nearly everything into it. My wife at the time, Meta, she thought I was mad. 51 years old, cashing out a solid pension to go into business. But I'd done the maths. I'd done the maths 100 times. 4 years. That's how long it lasted. My partner in the business, a man I'd known for over a decade, handled the books, the invoicing, the receivables. I did the work. That was the arrangement. And I trusted it, because that's what you do with a partner. You trust the parts of the job that aren't yours to check. Except I should have checked. That's the thing I keep coming back to. 18 years of testing every connection with my own hands, and then I hand a man the one connection that actually mattered, and I never once tested. He was gone before I understood what was happening, took what was left in the receivables account, which by that point was most of what the business was actually worth. And by the time the accountant rang me to ask why 3 invoices hadn't cleared, he'd already restructured his own affairs, so there wasn't much left to chase. The lawyers said there might be something recoverable. There wasn't, not really. Not enough to matter. I didn't lose the house. I want to say that clearly, because some of the stories on this channel, men lose everything, and I didn't have that. What I lost was something harder to put a number on. I lost the version of myself that thought he was careful. 55 years old, divorced by then as well. That had been coming for a while regardless. The business just hurried it along. And sitting in a flat outside Aarhus that felt too quiet, too gray, and thinking, quite honestly, what exactly was any of it for? I want to be honest about something else too. I wasn't devastated in the way you'd expect. I was angry, yes, but underneath the anger, there was just this flatness, like a wire that's live but not connected to anything. Current with nowhere to go. A man I used to work with on the line, Torben, he'd retired a few years before me, moved out to a place called Hua Hin, sent me photographs every winter without fail. Him on a beach chair somewhere, a Chang beer sweating in his hand, some grilled fish on a plate in front of him, and always some comment about the weather back home. -4 in Aarhus today, Gunnar. 29 here. That sort of thing. I told myself I was tired of the cold. That's the story I told myself anyway. My knees ached through every Jutland winter, the joints stiff from years of climbing in weather that had no business letting a man up a pole. Warm air sounded like medicine. But if I'm honest with you, and there's no point telling this story if I'm not going to be honest, I think what I actually wanted was somewhere nobody knew. Nobody in Hua Hin was going to ask me how the business was going. Nobody there had watched Meta and me at dinner parties for 15 years, and now didn't quite know what to say to me. I could just be a Danish man on a beach chair. Nothing more complicated than that. So I looked into it properly, the way I look into everything. Retirement visa requirements. I was 57 by then, well past the age threshold, and I had enough left, just enough. 800,000 baht or so I could put in a Thai bank account to qualify. Roughly what would have been about 110,000 kroner back home. Not a fortune. Tight, if I'm being accurate about it, but enough to get a visa and see what a year looked like. I told my daughter I was going for a trial. 6 months, maybe a year. See how it feels. She wasn't thrilled, but she didn't fight me on it either. I think by that point, everyone in my life had gotten used to the idea that I needed to do something, and Thailand was at least a something with a beach attached to it. I remember packing up that flat outside Aarhus and thinking, not for the first time, that I was 57 years old and everything I owned that mattered fit into 2 suitcases and a carry-on. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes with that thought. Not sad exactly, just quiet. I booked the flight for March, told Torben I was coming. He sent one more photograph before I left. Him, grinning, giving a thumbs up. Chang beer in the other hand. The caption, just 3 words. Come already, Gunner. So I did. Hua Hin hit me differently than I expected. I'd seen the photographs for years. Torben's beach chair, his grin. But a photograph doesn't have a smell to it. The airport in Bangkok already had me sweating through my shirt before I even got to the taxi rank. And that's before you factor in the drive down. 3 hours or so, the driver with the radio on some Thai pop station the whole way, past these enormous Buddha statues on hillsides and roadside stalls selling what I later learned was grilled squid. The smoke from the stalls just hanging in the heat. I'd rented a studio near the town center, a modest place, nothing flashy, month to month. Tourist visa. I kept telling myself, and I kept telling my daughter on the phone, that this was a trial. 6 months. See how it feels. Not a commitment. I believe I actually used that word trial more than once. The way you talk about testing a new piece of equipment before you signed off on it. First few weeks were, honestly, disorienting. Not in a dramatic way. Just everything was slightly off from what I expected. Even the things I thought I'd prepared for. The heat, for one. You read about it. 35 degrees, high humidity, and you think you understand, but you don't understand until you're standing at a food stall at 10 in the morning, already soaked through, ordering something off a menu you can't read, pointing at whatever the man next to you is eating, and the quiet of it in a strange way. Not quiet like Denmark is quiet. There was always noise. Motorbikes going past at all hours. Some construction 2 streets over that never seemed to actually finish anything. Roosters of all things. Roosters at 5 in the morning, like I was back on a farm. But underneath all that noise, there was a different kind of quiet. No wife, no job, no reason to get up at a particular time. I'd worked since I was 19 years old. 18 years on the polls, then 4 years running myself into the ground with the business, and now nothing. Just me and a rental studio and a fan that rattled if you put it above the second setting. I went to the market most mornings, more for something to do than anything else. There's a market near where I was staying, stalls selling everything from fresh fruit to fried chicken to some kind of sausage on a stick I never did learn the name of, and I'd walk through it slowly, buy a coffee, watch the day start. 3 weeks in, more or less, I was heading back from that market and I flagged down a tuk-tuk to take me the 10 minutes back to my place. I was tired, it was hot, and I didn't feel like walking it. The driver quoted me a price. I want to say it was something like 150 baht, which is nothing really, about 4 euros, but I'd read enough forum posts by that point to know the actual local rate for that distance was closer to 60 or 70. And I'll be honest, it wasn't really about the money. It was more that I didn't like the feeling of being read, of a man looking at me and deciding, there's a number for what this one will pay, and it's higher than what everyone else pays. I was standing there, not really arguing, just sort of hesitating, doing that thing where you're deciding whether it's worth the fight, when a woman came out from the little coffee stand nearby and said something to the driver in Thai. Fast. I couldn't follow a word of it, obviously, but the tone was unmistakable, sharp. The driver's face did something complicated, embarrassed maybe, and he mumbled something back, and she said something else, shorter, and he dropped the price. Just like that. 70 baht, and off I went. She turned to me afterward, and I remember thinking, she's not what I expected. Mid-30s maybe, dressed for an office rather than a bar, hair tied back, this composed sort of look about her. She said, in English, that was better than a lot of the English I'd heard from tourists, that he does that to everyone new. Don't worry about it. It's not personal. And then she made some joke, translating what she'd actually said to him, something about how she'd told him she'd tell his mother he was cheating Farang again. And she said it with this little wink, like she was letting me in on something. I laughed, genuinely laughed, which I hadn't done much of in the previous year. She introduced herself as B, said she worked at one of the hotels along the main road, front desk, had done for years. We talked for a few minutes, nothing significant, the kind of small talk you have with anyone. Where are you from? How long are you staying? Do you like the food yet? And that would have been the end of it, probably, except she said, almost as an afterthought, that there was a coffee place 2 streets over that did a proper flat white, not the instant stuff most places served. And if I wanted a break from 7-Eleven coffee, I should try it sometime. I want to be honest with you about something. I had read the warnings. Every forum, every article, every Torban-adjacent story about Farang men and Thai women who turn out to have 3 boyfriends already and a debt collector waiting. I'd read all of it before I ever got on the plane, and some small, careful part of me, the part that used to test every connection before trusting it, was watching this whole exchange and thinking, this doesn't fit the pattern. She has a job. She wasn't working a bar. She corrected a driver on my behalf and didn't ask for anything back. I told her I'd take her up on the coffee. That part didn't feel like a decision at the time. It felt like nothing at all. Just 2 people who'd had a small, ordinary moment together, agreeing to have a small, ordinary coffee. I didn't know yet that I'd remember it as the first thing that happened. I just knew the coffee was good, and that for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, I had something to look forward to on a Tuesday. The coffee place she'd mentioned turned out to be a small shop 2 streets back from the beach road, run by a Thai woman who'd apparently trained in Melbourne for a few years, and the flat white was, I'll admit, genuinely good. Better than anything I'd had in Denmark, if I'm honest, though that's not saying a huge amount. B showed up in her work clothes, said she had 40 minutes before her shift, and that was that. 40 minutes turned into a habit. Over the next 2 months, we saw each other maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Coffee before her shift, sometimes dinner after it, once a walk along the beach that took nearly 2 hours because we kept stopping to talk. And I want to explain something about the pace of it, because I think this is where I made my first real mistake. Though it didn't feel like a mistake at the time. It felt like the opposite. She had her own apartment, a small place inland from the tourist strip, which she paid for herself. She had her job at the hotel, had worked there 6 years, was clearly respected by the other staff, the way they'd nod to her when we walked past. She never once in those first 2 months asked me for anything. Not dinner, not a gift, nothing. If anything, I found myself paying for things and her pushing back a little, insisting on splitting the bill at a noodle place near her apartment, counting out her share in coins from her handbag like it actually mattered to her that it be fair. A month in, she introduced me to her mother. We drove out. Well, she drove. I still hadn't figured out the motorbike situation and wasn't about to start at 57. Out to a house maybe 40 minutes from Hua Hin, a simple place with a spirit house out front, the little offerings of incense and orange fana sitting in it, which I remember finding oddly moving, this small ritual gesture towards something bigger than the day-to-day. Her mother made some tam, pounded it right there in front of us in a big clay mortar, and kept refilling my plate whether I wanted more or not. She didn't speak much English, but she smiled a lot, and at one point patted my hand and said something to B that made B laugh and go a bit red. I asked what she'd said. B waved it off, said her mother thinks all foreigners are too thin and need feeding. Which, fine, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. But at the time, it just felt like a mother being a mother. Now, I want to be straight with you about something, because I think about this part a lot. One had read, before I ever got on that plane, every warning going. Bar girls, the whole economy of it, older men and younger women, and how it usually goes. And what I told myself sitting in that house eating some tam was that this was different. This wasn't a bar girl. This was a woman with her own income, her own flat, a mother who fed me, because that's apparently what mothers do here. Not because anyone was working an angle. And I was methodical about it, or I thought I was. I noticed the things that didn't fit the pattern, and I logged them mentally, the way you'd note down readings off a meter. No request for money, own apartment, own job. Introduced me to family early, which every single article said was supposed to be a good sign, not a warning sign. I was doing my due diligence, or so I believed. I just didn't understand yet that the due diligence itself was maybe part of what she understood, that the slowness wasn't an accident. I don't know that for certain, even now. I want to be fair about that. Some of what came later I think was real. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first money thing, and it was so small I almost don't want to mention it, happened maybe 6 weeks in. We'd gone for dinner at a seafood place along the coast, tables right out on the sand, this string of lights overhead, plates of grilled prawns, and a whole fish done in some tamarind sauce that I still think about. Good evening, one of the better ones. At the end of it, she reached for her bag and went very quiet, patted it down, said she must have left her wallet at the apartment. Looked genuinely annoyed with herself, embarrassed even. The bill came to about 800 baht, all told. 21 euros, give or take. I paid it without a second thought. Didn't even register as a moment, really not then. You forget your wallet, your date covers it, that's just an evening. I remember teasing her about it a little, and she laughed and said she'd get the next one, and swore me to secrecy so her mother never heard she'd been so scattered. That's the whole story of that particular 1,000 baht. Nothing dramatic, no music sting. Just a woman patting an empty bag at a table on the sand, and a Danish man reaching for his wallet because that's what you do. If you'd told me that evening that I'd remember it years later, I'd have laughed at you. It was nothing. That's rather the point. About 3 months in, maybe a little more, is when the first real request came, and I want to be careful here, because even now, even knowing everything I know, I don't think this one was invented. Her brother had a motorbike accident on the road out past Cham, one of those stretches where the trucks come through too fast and the shoulder just isn't wide enough. Broke his leg in 2 places, some damage to his shoulder as well. I saw the photographs. I saw him afterward on crutches. I met the man, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you this was staged. Thai hospitals, if you don't have the government scheme sorted or decent insurance, you pay up front before they'll do much of anything. That's just how it works. B explained this to me sitting on the edge of my bed, quite calm about it actually, more embarrassed than upset, saying the surgery and the pins and the few nights in hospital were going to come to around 45,000 baht. I did the conversion in my head, the way I always did, something like 1,200 euros. And I remember thinking, that's not nothing, but it's also not going to break me. I had savings, not a huge amount, but enough that a bill like that wasn't going to sink the ship. So I paid it, transferred it to her account, she went to the hospital, sorted the bill, and that was that. Her brother healed up fine. As far as I know, he's fine to this day. I don't regret that one. If a friend of mine back in Denmark had a brother in that situation, I'd have done the same, probably, if I had it to give. That's just decency. But here's the thing, and I only worked this out much later, going back through my own bank statements like some kind of forensic accountant of my own stupidity. That request came 4 days after my pension payment landed. 4 days. And I didn't clock it at the time. Why would you? An accident doesn't wait for your payday to happen. But it's a pattern I'd see again. And once you've seen a pattern a few times, you can't unsee it, even if each individual instance still looks, on its own, completely reasonable. Anyway, a few weeks after that, maybe 5 weeks, we're having dinner, and B starts telling me about her mother's situation. Her mother sold vegetables and some homemade goods at a spot near a local market, had done for years, just a folding table and an umbrella, weather permitting. There was an opportunity, B said, to get an actual stall, a proper covered space with real shelving, in a slightly better location where the foot traffic was heavier. The stall itself, the rights to it, plus stock to fill it, would come to around 180,000 baht. She was very specific, and I want to stress this, about the fact that this was not charity. She used that word herself, unprompted. Not a gift, she said, an investment. Her mother would pay it back, slowly, out of the profits, and in the meantime I'd be, in her words, part of the family business. She even sketched out on a napkin what the stall might bring in a month, multiplied it out over a year, showed me the arithmetic, which again appealed to something in me. A man who'd spent 30 years reading meters and checking figures, and here was a woman doing her own version of that, showing her working. It felt honest. It felt like the opposite of being conned. Funnily enough, because nobody trying to con you shows you a napkin full of sums. Or so I thought at the time. 180,000 baht. Roughly 4,700 euros. That was a real dent. That was money I'd earmarked, if I'm honest with myself, for emergencies, for the unexpected. But I transferred it anyway, in 2 parts because the bank flagged the first transfer as unusual, and I had to go in and explain myself to a very patient woman at the counter who barely blinked at the amount. This was apparently nothing unusual for her to see a farang do. The stall opened. I went and saw it, actually, a proper little setup, shelving, a hand-painted sign, her mother standing there looking genuinely proud, weighing to customers, and I remember standing there thinking, well, there it is. Tangible. Real. Not a story, an actual stall with actual goods on it. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, because I know how this sounds from the outside. I know exactly how it sounds. You're sitting there thinking, mate, 45,000 for the brother, 180,000 for the mother's stall. How did you not see where this was going? And the honest answer is, each one on its own made sense. Each one came with a story I could verify, at least partially. I saw the brother's leg. I saw the stall. These weren't fabrications pulled from thin air. What I didn't do, what I should have done given who I am, given 18 years of checking one connection after another before trusting it, was step back and look at the whole circuit. Not each individual joint, but the wire running through all of them. I didn't do that. I was busy feeling good about myself, actually. Feeling like the sort of man who helps a family that's welcomed him in. There's a vanity in that too, if I'm honest. Feeling needed. Feeling useful again, after 2 years of feeling like neither of those things. Around this time, B stopped talking about it as her family's business and started saying, our family. Small shift. I don't think I even noticed it happening in real time. She'd say things like, when our stall does well next season, or your Thai family, meaning her mother and her brother, would love to see you again soon. And I liked it. God help me, I liked being called part of something again. My savings by this point had come down more than I'd tracked properly. I'd stopped doing the maths the way I used to do the maths, back when the maths was the only thing keeping the business running. That should have worried me more than it did. It was around then that B first mentioned the land near Sharam. Just mentioned it. Nothing more than that, an offhand comment about a plot her cousin knew was coming up for sale. Cheap, good location, close to the coast road. She didn't ask for anything. Not yet. Just planted it there, the way you'd plant anything, and let it sit. The land came up properly, maybe 2 months after that first mention. B brought it to me almost apologetically, like she didn't want to be the one raising money again so soon after the stall. She said her cousin, who worked in some capacity at a land office, had heard about a plot near Chiam, decent size, not right on the beach but close enough, maybe 15 minutes on a motorbike, and the owner needed to sell quickly, family reasons, and the price was good because of it. 900,000 baht. I did the sum without even reaching for my phone by that point. I'd gotten quick at it. Roughly 23,500 euros. And I want you to understand what that number meant for me specifically, because I wasn't a wealthy man playing with spare change. That was most of what I had left. Not all of it. I kept enough back to satisfy the retirement visa requirement, the 800,000 you're meant to keep sitting in a Thai account. But beyond that, 900,000 baht was close to the whole of my remaining cushion. The 4 years of the failed business, The divorce, all of that had already thinned things down considerably before I ever got on the plane. This was what was left of what was left. Now, the legal side of it, I want to be fair to myself here. I did know about this part. You cannot buy land in Thailand as a foreigner. I'd read that, and the first week I arrived, it's one of the first things anyone tells you. So when B raised it, she raised it as something she'd already thought through. The land would have to go in her name. That's simply the law. There's no way around it that isn't some gray area company structure that everyone online tells you to avoid. But she said, and I remember this almost word for word because I turned it over so many times afterwards, she said, "It will be ours, Gunnar. The name on the paper is just the name on the paper." We even had something drawn up. Not a proper contract exactly, I know that now, but a signed agreement between the two of us stating my contribution, stating the intention that it was a joint investment, that any future sale would be split according to what each of us put in. At the time, that felt like due diligence. It felt like the responsible version of a reckless thing. I remember thinking, other men just hand the money over and hope. I'm getting this in writing. I'm being the careful one. I transferred the money in 3 installments over about 6 weeks because moving that much at once triggered enough paperwork on both ends that it made more sense to break it up. Each time I did it, I felt this strange mixture of things. Part dread, if one am honest, a small cold voice somewhere asking what in God's name I thought I was doing. And part something else. Pride, maybe. The idea that I was building something again. That I'd come to Thailand with nothing, feeling like nothing, and here I was, 2 years in, about to own, well, half own, sort of own. The paperwork was complicated. A piece of land by the sea. We went out to see it together once the sale went through. Just scrub, really, some low grass, a few banana trees at one edge, a view if you squinted toward where the coast road ran. B stood there talking about what we might build eventually, a small house, nothing grand, somewhere for us and somewhere, she said, for her mother to visit and stay when she got older. I stood there in the heat, sweat running down my back, listening to the cicadas going in the trees, and I thought, this is the moment. This is the thing I came here for, without knowing it. Not a woman exactly, not even the land exactly. Just this, being part of a plan again. That was by any measure the point of no return. Whatever was left of my savings after that land purchase was thin enough that I couldn't have absorbed another shock. Not without real consequences. And I think some part of me knew that even as it was happening, the way you know a wire's live even before you've tested it, just from the hum of it, it was maybe 3 weeks after we'd stood on that plot of land that I did something I'd never done before in the whole 2 years I'd known her. I sat down one evening with my laptop, opened up my bank statements going back to that very first missing wallet at the seafood place, and started lining things up against dates. Not because I suspected anything specific. More out of habit, honestly, the same habit that used to make me walk a line twice before I signed off on a job. I told myself I was just being tidy. I hadn't expected to find what I found. What I found was a spreadsheet's worth of coincidence. I lined up every request against the dates my pension landed in my Danish account, then against the transfer dates on the Thai side, and there they were. The brother's accident, 4 days after payment, the market stall, 6 days after, the first land installment, 3 days after, the second, 5. Not one of them fell more than a week outside my payday. An accident doesn't know your payday. A cousin at a land office selling cheap because of a family emergency doesn't know your payday either. Coincidences don't usually line up that tidily, not 4 times running. In my old job, if 4 separate faults kept appearing on the same section of the same line, you didn't call it bad luck. You called it a wiring problem and you went and found it. I sat with that for a few days. Didn't say anything to B, went about things normally, or as normally as I could manage. Coffee before her shift, dinner most evenings, the two of us talking about the little house we might build on the land eventually. And the whole time there's this other conversation going on in my head, quiet, methodical, the way you'd run through a checklist before you touched a live wire. I want to be fair here because it matters to me that I am. I don't think the accident was invented. I still don't. I think her brother really did break his leg. I think her mother really did need that stall. I think the sister really is in school, and the fees really are due when B says they're due. None of that, I believe, was fiction. What I couldn't shake was the timing. The way genuine needs seemed to arrive right on schedule, like it had learned my calendar. Whether that's her doing, deliberately, or her family's doing, or just the ordinary rhythm of people who know when the foreign boyfriend's money comes in and don't see anything wrong with asking then, I genuinely don't know. Might be all three. Probably is. Torben had mentioned once, in passing, over a chang at his place, that there was a fellow up in the Danish society group in Hua Hin, older bloke, name of Eric, who used to work land registry adjacent stuff back home, some kind of surveying, and now spent half his retirement helping expats untangle Thai paperwork nobody explained to them properly. I rang Torben, asked for the number, told him I was just curious about land registration generally, nothing specific. He didn't push. I met Eric at a bakery near the clock tower, one of those places that does a decent enough imitation of a Danish rundstykke if you squint, and I laid it out for him in the vaguest terms I could manage. A friend of mine, I said, bought land near Chiam with his girlfriend, wanted to understand the registration properly, just to be sure everything was in order. Eric didn't buy the friend line for a second. I could see it in his face, but he was decent enough not to say so. He said he could pull the parcel details from the land office record if I had the plot reference, which I did because I'd kept every piece of paper from that transaction the way I keep every invoice from every job I've ever done. 2 days later, he messaged me online, said he'd found it, said I should probably sit down for this one, or words to that effect. The land was registered, as expected, under B's name, but there was a second name on the document as well, a man's name, Somchai, listed alongside hers in a way that, according to Eric, only really makes sense for one reason in Thai property records of that kind. I sat there with my phone in my hand outside that bakery, cars going past, some tuk-tuk idling with its engine rattling two-stroke, the smell of the bakery's coffee still on the air, and I read that name 3 or 4 times like it might rearrange itself into something else if I looked hard enough. It didn't. Somchai, it turned out, when I finally worked up the nerve to ask around rather than ask her directly, was B's husband, still married, still, as far as anyone could tell me, living in the same province, not far from where I'd been eating som tam with her mother for the better part of 2 years. I sat on that name for the better part of a week before I did anything with it. That's not like me, or it wasn't like the old me, the one who tests a connection the moment he's got a reading he doesn't trust. But I wanted to be sure I wasn't about to blow up something on nothing more than a name on a document and a gut feeling. So I checked, quietly, asked a woman at the hotel where B worked, someone who'd always been friendly to me, whether she knew a Somchai connected to B's family. She went very still for a second, and that stillness told me more than any answer would have. Eventually she said carefully that yes, everyone at the hotel knew, that it wasn't exactly a secret, just not something anyone brought up with the Farang boyfriend. I confronted B on a Tuesday evening, in her apartment, the fan going overhead the way it always did, some motorbike outside revving its engine longer than it needed to. I didn't shout. That's not really in me anyway. And I decided beforehand I wasn't going to give her the version of me that loses control, because I think some part of me already suspected that whatever came next, I'd want to be the one still standing steady when it was done. I asked her straight out, is there a husband? Is his name Somchai? Is he on the land registration with you? She didn't cry. I'd braced for that, if I'm honest. Some part of me had already written the scene where she broke down, and I had to decide whether to believe it. Instead, she went quiet, then almost businesslike, the way you'd explain a policy to a guest who'd complained about their room. She said yes, said they were separated in every way that mattered, hadn't lived together in years. But a Thai divorce is its own long process, and in the meantime it was simpler, for the land, for everything, to keep him on certain documents. She said this like it was a reasonable administrative choice, rather than something she let me build a future around without once mentioning it. I asked her if she loved me. She said yes, and I believe that she believed it when she said it, whatever that's worth. I asked her if any of it was real. The stall, the mother, the brother's leg. She looked almost offended, I'd ask. Of course it was real, she said. Why would I lie about my own family? And that's the strange, uncomfortable truth of the whole thing. The part one still turn over. I don't think she was lying about her family. I think she was lying, or at best not telling me, about her husband and about exactly how convenient my arrival had been for a family that already had real needs and now had a foreign man who kept covering them. I didn't stay to argue it out further. I went back to my studio that night, and I did something that surprised even me. I didn't drink. I didn't ring Torben and pour my heart out over a Chang. I got out every piece of paper I had, the land agreement, the transfer receipts, the signed document stating my contribution, and the intention of joint ownership, and I laid it all out on the table like I was tracing a fault on a schematic. The agreement, badly drafted as it was, still stated plainly that I'd contributed 900,000 baht toward the purchase, and that any future sale of the land required my written consent as a condition of releasing my share of any proceeds. Whoever's name sat on the actual deed, that clause was real, and it was mine. I went back to Eric, this time with no pretense about a friend. He put me in touch with a Thai lawyer in Hua Hin who dealt with exactly this kind of mess. Expat money tangled up in family land. It took nearly 2 months of back and forth, letters, one deeply uncomfortable meeting in the lawyer's office with B sitting across from me, not quite meeting my eyes. But in the end, she agreed to a settlement rather than risk a dispute over the land dragging on through a Thai court with a signed contract sitting in evidence against her. I got back roughly 550,000 baht of my 900,000, about 14,000 euros. Not everything. Not close to everything, once you add in the stall money in the wallet and the rest of it that was simply gone for good. I won't pretend that's a happy ending. I lost money. I lost 2 years I won't get back, and a version of myself that believed being careful was enough to protect you from people, which maybe it never was. Not entirely. But I didn't end up the way some of the men on this channel end up. Broke, humiliated, nothing left. I ended up bruised, poorer, wiser in a way I'd rather not have paid for, but still standing, still able to look at myself and think, you didn't just hand it all over and walk away with nothing. If there's a lesson in it, and I've had a long time to sit with this one, it's not don't trust anyone. That's too simple, and it isn't even true to what happened. Some of it was real. Her family's needs were real. What I'd tell another man sitting where I used to sit is this: test the whole circuit, not just the connection in front of you. Get things in writing even when it feels rude to ask. And when 4 coincidences line up in a row, they've usually stopped being coincidences. That's Gunner's story, and I think what stays with me about it isn't the land or the money or even Somchai, whoever he is. It's that moment at the table with the paperwork spread out in front of him, choosing to trace the fault instead of just walking away from the wreckage. Most of the stories we bring you on this channel end with a man realizing, often too late, what he lost. Gunner's is one of the rare ones where a man used exactly what made him who he was. Decades of trusting nothing until he tested it himself, to claw back some small piece of what was his. We don't say this to excuse what happened to him, and we're not going to pretend B's side of this is simple either. Real needs, real family, real affection, tangled up with real deception, all at once, the way these things so often are. That's Thailand, and that's love, and money, and family. Wherever you go, honestly, it's rarely as clean as villain and victim. If this story meant something to you, let us know in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like Gunner's. This is Thailand. We'll see you in the next one.